Hi everyone, thanks for coming. The plan for today was to welcome back a couple of our alumni here. Emily Austin was the class of 2000, philosophy major who's now teaching philosophy at Wake Forest University. And Amanda Ball, who was a religion major and is now a professor of religious studies at California State University at Northridge. And the thought was that each of them have a chance to talk a little bit about their memories of Hendricks and the Raney building and liberal arts experience and how that helped them in graduate school and teaching and research and anything we want, really. And then turn things over to Dr. McDaniel, who is going to share his reflections and also build on a little of what they have to say. So, Emily, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I guess I was thinking earlier today, because I had no idea what this was going to be, sort of like a kind of informal discussion. And I had lunch with a few students, and I was thinking about how, like, now it seems like the main plan for for various market reasons for administrations is to like have this beautiful like campus experience where everything is somehow like perfectly well designed so that when you visit it will be, you know, like the place you want to be. And so like a lot of the discussions is about like having the right spaces, you know, like we need the right space for all these things. And I was just thinking about how like it really is important to have a space, like a space you can be in where like people can meet and talk and hang out before classes. But it occurred to me that it really doesn't have to be a nice space. And I was thinking, like, actually Raney was a kind of disgusting building. It was once the infirmary, and so the doors were extra wide to get the beds through, and the furniture, is this the same furniture? Okay, well the furniture then was a little bit dicey, and now, so maybe even a little bit older. And I mean, everybody kind of remembers the coffee, but it was, I think, like there were places where people could congregate, like in the building and then right outside of the building where all the students who smoked hung out. And then for me, the pagoda, which is outside and the only thing remaining from a building I love, where I spent most of my time. And so I was thinking that it really doesn't, like the Raney building was just a good place. Like it was, I guess, when it was about to be torn down, I thought like, no, they're not going to tear it down, are they? And then I guess Fred sent me the pictures of its destruction, and that was terrifying. But I just remember it was great because there was like the philosophy room and the religion room. So you knew if you were taking a class in philosophy, it's the one on the left side. If it's religion, it's the one on the right side. And I took a number of classes in philosophy, but I also took classes with did I take 2 classes with Jane? I definitely took.
I know at least one.
I took religion and literature, but and I took a class with Farthing on the history of religion. So yeah, it was just, I think it was a really good experience for me. I mean, it was a very social experience, and so I'm hoping that when you guys move over to Eads, that will come back. And it doesn't have to be nice. It just has to be there. So yeah, maybe you have.
Yeah. So I was thinking about it, and so of course, you know, we're scholars. The first thing I was thinking about, like my intellectual development. You know, I started here as a biology major. I was going to be a different kind of doctor, and I just like started. There are distro requirements here. Where I'm at GE. I took a distro class in world religions, and I had Rachel Wagner, and she said, you know, we only spent 2 weeks on Buddhism, but you could take a whole class on Buddhism. And we only spent 2 weeks on Islam, but you could take a whole class. I was like, yeah, I definitely want to do that. And then I figured out that I was terrible at biology and probably shouldn't major in it. I have a C on my transcript from botany. And then so I decided I was going to switch to environmental studies. And then I never actually declared that, but I was looking at my plans, and it was like the religious studies classes that I really, really wanted to take. And so, you know, I was like, all right, I guess I better major in religious studies. And as I told Jay's students earlier today, I've been accused of having grown up in the secular ghetto, and like people who were religious were like people that I would not want to talk to. And it was in his class that I started having like these really interesting conversations with people, and kind of opened up this room for dialogue. And I've kind of reflected that that was kind of the beginning of my ethnographic research, like kind of hanging out with religious people, like, okay, it's not that scary, that's cool, like, you know. And that began here. I took Hebrew Bible, and I'd never read the Bible, and it was, you know, it's like, okay, sure, history, but this was written as a text, and there are people that are having like jaw-dropping, shocking experiences in there. And so I was kind of like, oh, I guess this stuff actually like does have some sort of influence on the world, that like these ideas matter for some reason. So I think that's kind of, and I majored in J. McDaniel. And so I think, you know, like everything started here intellectually. But then I also reflected, so I just happened to remember in the back of my mind our motto, unto the whole person. And I realized, so I have 2 little boys. When my first one was born, I didn't want to leave him ever. And so I would take him with me to work. You know, I had a little carrier. He came to all these meetings, and I never asked permission. And I never saw anybody else like carrying their babies around, but it was kind of like obvious that my kid could be there. My second one actually was born at an NEH institute in Flagstaff. He came 5 weeks early. So he's an Arizona baby because of that. And like I'll tell my friends who have babies, like, just bring them, like, who cares? Like, it's fine. And they're like, oh, no, I couldn't do that. My department wouldn't allow both. And it's like, my department, I've never seen anybody else. And so I was reflecting here, like, where did I learn that that's okay? And I realized it was here. And we had Donna Bowman visited in your class, and she had her baby in a sling. I remember Frances Flannery, her kids were always on her couch. Rachel Wagner, I remember, had like toys from her kid that she would use as visual aids. And I think it's here that I found out, you know, the women in grad school were definitely not a role model. It was kind of like, hide your kids, don't let anybody know that you have them. And I think it was here that I learned, like, you can be a scholar and a human being, and like, you know, it's okay that you're a mother, and that's great, and like I own it. And I think that I learned that here. So I think the unto the whole person. Oh, and I had one more anecdote I was going to say too, because I think, like, even though it's the whole college that's unto a whole person, I did notice this at the time when I was here. I was a biology major, and I would miss class for athletics, and I would go tell my biology professors, like, I'm going to be gone, I've got a game. And like, okay, you know, see you when you get back. And I would tell my religious studies professor, man, you know, I understand, but we will really miss you. I'm so sorry that you'll be gone. You know? So I think that the Raney building and the people in there embodied that motto more than anybody else. So those are my reflections.
Well, I think my job is to say just a short word and then invite people to remember things as well from your experiences in the Raney building. So I've been at Hendrix for 39 years, and I've seen lots. And when I first arrived, not only was the Raney building disgusting, you could smoke in it. And a lot of my colleagues at that time smoked pipes. And there tended to be some kind of osmosis, you know. So if Francis Christie smokes a pipe, John Churchill smokes a pipe, John Farthing smokes a pipe. So I can remember pipe odor. And we had and dogs. We had a dog named John, and he was a mangly dog. But everybody loved John, and there were already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bathrooms in the place because it's an old infirmary, but there were 6 Johns. And one of them walked around. But what I really remember was, I guess I'm kind of grateful for all that I learned in just informal conversation, both with colleagues and with students. And there's not a professor in the room that's not on a continuing education project. And we're continually learning, we're continually receiving insights, and the numbers of insights that I personally have received, actually from each person in the room, each person, and I can look at each one of you and think of that if you had a history in that room. And I'm very grateful for that, for an ongoing continuing education project. It was also great that, by the way, when I say it, there's the Raney building and then there's the Raney atmosphere. And I certainly trust that the Raney atmosphere transcends the Raney building. And I've had Raney moments that were by no means in the Raney building. And I trust and hope that the Raney spirit, however named, will be in Ellis in a wonderful way. And they are going to have some good spaces. Not quite as disgusting. But may those conversations continue. You might be interested to know how the Friday afternoon discussions began. It's just a kind of interesting story. So there's this character way back in the history of the Raney building, and his name is Francis Christie. And he was about 26 feet tall, according to my memory. He's a very tall man. Did you all know Francis Christie? Yeah.
I did.
Christie had this booming voice, very good teacher. And Christie and John Churchill, whom you knew so well, they loved words. They simply loved language. And their idea of a terribly great time was to get out the Oxford English Dictionary, open it up, put it in their lap, and it was almost like, you know, that Bible method where you close your eyes and go like this. They would flip to a page, go like this, point to a word, and fall in love with the etymology. Oh, well, this word is connected to this word is connected to this word. And it would take them on a journey. And they would spend about an hour. And it was on Mondays. I had thought it was on Fridays, but somebody corrected me. And it was called the Sodality for Harmless Drudges. Now, I had no idea what sodality meant, and just a vague idea of what drudge meant, but I got it. So it was a colloquium for harmless drudges who just plain like ideas and want to take a journey. And it was about language. It was about the Oxford English Dictionary and the etymology of words. That alone. So here came this firebrand professor from Claremont Graduate School, Jay McDaniel, who was so interested in philosophy and religion. And I look back at that time and I think, oh, how immature I was. I seriously do. Because my feeling was, we need to talk about ideas too. and current topics. And make it interdisciplinary. And bring in the college. So that's when it changed from the Sodality for Harmless Drudges to the Friday afternoon discussions. And moved from Monday to Friday. And I think we did it for, gosh, a long, long time. So I sent out a little note to some friends here the other day and said, do you have any memories about that you just would like to share, just to kind of add to the hopper? And I got one from Jane. I think it was Jane. It was when you applied. Would you tell that story?
Oh, sure. I interviewed for a position at Hendrix College. I'd never heard of Hendrix College when I saw the interview. And this was back in the days before the internet. This was on a piece of, it may have been typed, it may have been, anyway, it was a piece of paper that had this listing for a vacancy. Anyway, I was thrilled. I was ABD, nobody was going to hire me in 1990. No, this was 89 that I applied for the job. I got an interview it was February or March of 1990. And it happened that I came out on a Thursday, and the interview was part of Thursday and then all day Friday. And I stayed over Friday night because my flight back to North Carolina was cheaper on Saturday. And so I happened to be here on a Friday afternoon. And I was so impressed. This just wasn't part of my experience, either as an undergraduate or certainly in graduate school, that a group of people would gather at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon to talk about ideas. And I remember that Friday afternoon, it was Ian King and Zeb Burrell, and they were talking about U.S.-Russia relations. It's something that had to do with foreign relations, and it had to do with Russia, I think. I'm pretty sure it did. And there were students, and I remember the lobby was actually fairly full that afternoon. I was just really impressed, both that the faculty were offering, out of their experiences and expertise, something very provocative and interesting, and then the student participation was just impressive. It was exciting to see students asking great questions, the lively conversation and engagement with faculty. And I just thought when I had time to think about later that evening about Hendrix and the whole day and the prospect of being on the faculty here, what an exciting place this would be. And talk about continuing education, to have Friday afternoons with my colleagues offering their expertise and with energized and engaged students participating. How exciting that would be. So when the offer came, I was thrilled to be part of a community where for an hour on Friday afternoon we would get together and have stimulating conversation or just have fun sorts of engagement, or have people coming from, experts coming from off campus to share their expertise. For me, it's been a wonderful part of my 28 years at Hendrix to have these discussions on Friday afternoon. And it all began back in, February or March of 1990, before I was even part of the community. Was one of the things that really impressed me about this place.
CJ, you've got a memory side, I imagine.
Well, I mean, I think that just hearing that really did bring up the equality of the discussion, right? Students and faculty were there, and it was a give and take, often between students and faculty. And that there wasn't, you get to graduate school and it's like, oh, graduate students, sit back, be quiet, watch this, right? And here it was already that. And I think that was pretty important.
Do you
for me.
remember any subjects that we dealt with that were especially interesting or engaging to you?
I mean, a couple. I mean, and why do I don't know why I remember those, but I mean, Friday afternoon discussions was the end of the week, right? It was how one did it. And it was often people, groups of students, right? And as the years progressed, I remember, retiring to the next round in a different location. So I mean, that was, I remember Stephen Yablo, I think, and that was like the first time I'd ever really gotten to talk, had really read a paper and got to go to dinner with a philosopher kind of thing. So that was very interesting. Yeah.
Fred, do you remember Stephen Young?
Yes.
Would you say a word about him? Just give us a little picture of that.
Oh, yeah, an MIT professor. It must have, I don't know what class I brought him in with, metaphysics maybe?
Raney? But I was too young. I mean, this was maybe my freshman year.
Freshman or
So I
sophomore,
was
yeah.
probably in that class. But.
That was, you reminded me of this. The first 2 or 3 years I invited speakers, we had people over to my house.
That's right.
Because I remember thinking at the time, it's on this subject, right, of including everybody, I thought, well, if we go out to dinner, you get 2 or 3 professors and a guest, but if we have it at my house, I can invite all the students and lots more professors to sit around. When we first moved into the house, there wasn't much furniture, so there was plenty of places to sit on the floor. I remember Yablo and Roy Sorensen the next year, yeah, just a bunch of students sitting around my barren living room floor, eating food and talking, yeah, I remember that well. He also was excited because I guess his wife didn't let him smoke at home. So before people came over, he said, "Can I go back and smoke?"
They were smokers, man.
Yeah. Peg, do you have any memories that you want to share?
Well, as people talk, a lot come to mind. I don't have them under a united theme. As Jane was speaking, I was thinking about the person who came and interviewed. I can't remember who it was. And there was a tornado warning that went off. She was interviewing in Mills South. In Raney South. Tornado warning went off, and we all gathered in the kitchen there, until that stopped. You mentioned Francis Christie. My office was right next door to his, and so I would often, I used him in 2 kinds of examples of inductive arguments when I was teaching logic, and one was how his footsteps would be familiar to me, right? I hear this set of footsteps. The last time I heard those, it was Francis Christie, the next time, and so on. And then also his pipe smoke, that the smell would arrive, and I would think, Francis Christie. It's an example of inductive reasoning. And when you were talking about speakers, I remember, do you remember when we hosted, Jay, you helped me do this, the workshop on philosophy of religion and theology? And we invited area philosophers and theologians to come and present works in practice for a weekend, and then we would have one special invited guest. We did that with Steel Center funds, I think, and we hosted it right there in the Raney building. And at that time in my life, it seemed like any time you presented a paper, it had to be at these more, I don't know, aggressive, beat down the speaker sorts of philosophy meetings. And so I felt like we were doing something, offering the world something quite unusual, that people brought things that weren't complete, right? And they read them and got positive feedback. So we were just trying to change the culture a little bit. And I associate that with Raney
You
building.
had those workshops for
Several years.
2 or 3 years.
Until it turned out we got iced out several days and several times in a row, or maybe when I went over to the Lilly program. We stopped.
I enjoyed recruiting faculty from Hendrix to come make a presentation, get a little feedback, and I think I probably recruited everybody in the room toward that end. One time when I recruited Peg, I love to do titles. I didn't care about the substance. I just wanted provocative titles. And so I think one of the titles was something like Dr. Peg Fulls Corbett, straight shooting on abortion, or something like that. And, no nonsense. Here we go. These are the issues. And I think when Dr. Sanders first came, we were so eager to get an introduction to open theism, and I can well remember your presentation. You remember that?
I remember 2 students going after me.
So tell us about it. Tell us about it.
And Fran was sitting there, and they were going after me on Romans 9. Like, dude, it's settled. Look at the scripture. Don't you know how to read the Bible? And you know, my background in evangelicalism is like, well, let's look at the passage, look at the context. I don't think Paul. I go with this. It's called, you know, particular understanding, the new perspective on Paul and the law. And what you're doing is going with Luther's reading of Paul and the law. I don't buy that stuff. And Fran is sitting there like, that's not what we do in biblical studies, you know. And I was like, yeah, but this is the theology of the Bible and stuff. And these 2 students were just animated and like, how can you even say these ridiculous things about God? It's not fun.
You know, Matt, I was saying last night when I introduced Emily, just there's a kind of healthy intensity to the environment, because both sets of faculty were there, the students had to be there. I mean, if you were in philosophy of religious studies, you were going to come to the Raney building. And so many ideas bouncing around in a non-conflictual way, I felt like. And often you would come in thinking about these. I would come in early in the morning in those days. Remember, I came in very early. And there would be somebody sleeping. Back then, they didn't lock the doors, right? This would be somebody who had slept the night in the Raney building.
And when you first came, you would have teas, as I recall, and introduce students to the arts of tea in that distant office.
Yeah.
And actually, your offices have always been so nice. But do you remember those? How'd you do it?
I do. Well, I do remember, you know, in some sense, you know, this was a great entree into like academic culture. You know, this is my first time, you know, full-time sort of tenure track position. Liberal arts college, great. I went to a liberal arts college, but and I remember you saying, you know, kind of giving advice for, you know, how do you get to know your students? Or you telling me actually something that I don't think I've ever done, but I always admired, that you would have students of world religions one by one parade through your office, and you would ask them about their interests or find something out about them to see whether you could connect and maybe perhaps encourage further interest in some sense. And I thought to myself, well, I can't do that. That's too much. But I had a friend, a Malaysian Chinese friend, who in grad school introduced me to drinking tea in somewhat of a formal yet informal style. It's not like Japanese tea ceremony tea, but it's Kung Fu Cha, and it's little cups and multiple pourings, and we would do it together, and there'd be snacks, and it was kind of a fun thing. And I had a set. And I thought, well, you know, I don't know anybody here, but but Jay had a number of students who had taken Buddhism and things like that. I'm thinking about like Ryan
Yeah.
and other people, and I'm like, well, I have to have office hours, and maybe Friday, before Friday afternoon discussion, I can make tea and
Yeah.
see if anybody will show up. And so that was, at least for a year or something, I kind of think of it as BC, which is sort of before children. I was like, I'm going to hang out in my office and make tea. And in a way now I'm kind of nostalgic because I haven't done that in a long time.
It was really great.
It was.
Yeah.
And this was the kind of environment that thought, great, that type of thing is,
Yeah.
instead of, you should be working on your next presentation, or it was like, oh no, you're relating to students. And,
Can I tell one more story? It's not about the Raney building, but Jay, it is about teaching with you, and it relates to you and to your story about family and Hendrix. So Jay and I used to teach feminist thought together. We would co-teach it, and it was a great experience. There's probably more that could be said there, but it was really part of building a relationship and we were in the classroom together every class period, I think. It was a wonderful time. Well, when I teach, one of the things I try to do is I'm trying to get the students to buy into the philosophical perspective that's the perspective of the day, or if they're buying in too quickly, of course, to get them to criticize it. But it's not to put my position out there. So in feminist thought, I was teaching an article by a feminist who argued that women should just stop being a part of patriarchy by marrying and having men's babies. But I happened to be about 7 months pregnant at the time. It was just a little hard to pretend I didn't already have a position on it.
Jay, I want to talk about, I had the opportunity to bring some of my teachers from grad school to visit as Steel Center lecturers, and they gave a Friday afternoon discussion. And I want to say how much they talked about the experience, particularly of the Friday afternoon discussion and the engagement with students. Bart Ehrman, Grant Wacker, those two in particular made comments about how much they enjoyed that interaction and how really special that was. Not many places have that kind of opportunity for engagement with students as we provided. And it made a really strong, very positive impression on those folks who came out here and lectured, but especially the Friday afternoon discussion was a real highlight for them of their time on this campus.
I remember that, and we get to meet them too.
Mm-hmm.
So Bart Ehrman, I remember sitting in my office, one-on-one,
Yeah.
What do you think about this? What do you think about that? So that it provided that an occasion for meeting some people we otherwise never could have met, and actually letting them know about Hendrix College too, when they'd have no other way to. Anybody else got a memory they want to share, or something they want to reflect upon? You have been so faithful. Do you have any memory?
Well, actually, the way I met you was through Friday afternoon discussion. You did a talk about eco-theology. At the end I asked what eco-theology was, and you said, well, that's a good question. And so we set up a meeting to talk more about it. So that's the way I met you, and the way I met Dr. Harris and Dr. Sanders. I've never taken a religion class, but I feel like I know all the religious faculty really well because of Friday afternoon discussions, and engaged in a lot of conversations with you guys because of it.
Have you led some too? I think you've led some.
I've led, the one that stands out is I did the Before I Die Wall project right before the Raney building was demolished, and it basically was a chalkboard where people could write, before I die, I want to whatever. And so I did a talk about that.
Are there any that are especially memorable? CJ, you want to say something?
Oh, no.
Any especially memorable? I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, from the student's perspective.
I don't know if this is just because it was more recent, but Dr. McGill, I think is her name, she talked about art and Buddhism, and I really liked that talk.
Yeah.
Also more recent was the Japanese tea ceremony.
Speaking of the Asian component, I do think some of the most memorable events, not in the Raney building, but supported by the Steel Center, have when we brought Tibetan monks here.
The
And
sand paintings?
The sand
Yeah.
paintings. I mean,
Amazing.
you have a whole lot of Hendrix folks coming to watch that and be present to that. And how many times have you done that, Bill? Twice, 3 times?
A few times, and and prior to that, of course, you should maybe say something about Fukoshi Moroshi
Yeah.
and all that you've done, prior to the
Yes.
last 10 years or so. But I've really appreciated that about the Steel Center. That's enabled me to maintain relationships with, with friends, with Tibetans,
Yeah.
from India and from elsewhere in the U.S. who've been able to come through and kind of show something that isn't otherwise that easily kind of represented here, and in ways that allow, for kind of sustained and kind of direct access. Sometimes over time, we've done it in different configurations. I mean, on the one hand, there's the mystical arts of Tibet, which is actually a lot of fun. And we had, when my son was, less than a year old or about a year, we had 10 monks stay in our 3-bedroom ranch with us. And it was awesome to see those guys because they were on the road a lot. They did it a lot. And they were able to enter into a household and immediately know what to do.
Right.
And some people are cooking in the kitchen, basic child care, like the whole thing happened, which is a lot of fun. And then other times, we had, sort of less highly kind of produced people come through, but that's been something that I don't know if I would have expected, or I kind of realized other colleagues don't have something like the Steel Center to help fund and support those type of cultural events. And and there's a long history of that precedes me, and in some sense I give you a lot of thanks for kind of setting precedent.
You're welcome.
And
Thank
I'd love
you.
to hear about more of what happened before I got here in 2006.
Well, I don't want to belabor, but thank you so much, because Roshin Fukushima was really an important part of this campus for, what would you say, about 10 years. He'd come once a year. I was his English teacher way back. We lost touch with each other, and then one day I get a call, and he says, Jay, I'm in the United States. I'm speaking at Columbia University, and I'd like to come see you. And I said, great. And he showed up, and he liked Hendrix. He could actually let his hair down here, because if you're a Zen master, when you go places, people kind of bow down to you, you're elevated. But he could come here, and he could come to my house and play with my children and get on the floor and do all kinds of things that he couldn't do in other settings. And he loved Hendrix a lot. He would lead an introduction to Zen meditation on Thursdays. He'd give a Zen talk that night. He'd lead a retreat up at Pettigene on the weekends, and he would do the Zen calligraphy. I don't know if any of you saw that. I'm going to give a talk tomorrow, and I have a little snippet of a video of him just kneeling down and doing the calligraphy. But I'm grateful to him for having done so much for this college. While we're in that area, Lawrence Schmidt's dad came once, and he was Buddhist interested. I don't know if he's self-identified Buddhist, but deeply Buddhist interested. And we had meditation in the Raney building under the tutelage of Dr. Paul Schmidt. And you know those hallways in the Raney building, right? So they were lined up from Raney North to Raney South with people sitting on the floor, and all the way back in the lobby, and there was Dr. Lawrence's dad in the middle, introducing us to Zen meditation as best he could. One thing that I wanted to do, and I'm sure will continue, I do hope, that I give every faculty person a chance to share something important to them and get some feedback. And if I fail to do that, my apologies, and may it happen in the future. But I do think the Steel Center can be an occasion in which, like Peg was saying, in a non-pressure way, you don't have to have your thoughts fully formed. You don't have to wow an academic audience. You just kind of share what's on your mind and what you've been thinking, and we'll help you think it through as best we can. I think that's something you can do. Fred and I have been music partners for a year. Everybody knows that I'm totally obsessed with music, and Fred was my teacher. And I would go to Fred's office so often and say, what can I be listening to? And Fred knows everything. I know just a little. But I always enjoyed those when, you know, Fred, would you mind leading the Friday afternoon discussion on the top 20 albums of, what was the last one you did, Fred? Was it?
Here's the top 10 of all time.
Definitive, no questions asked.
Yeah.
Greatest CDs ever.
It was, that's right, definitive.
What were they?
There were 2 Bob Dylans on there. And I could have put more, but I thought, yeah. Stop it too.
I thought it was great.
Jay, I just want to affirm that you did do that it seemed like, yes, when I was a new faculty member, you would zero in on what is this person's real interest and how can we shape that into a good title for Friday afternoon discussion. But not just in our departments, right? You really reached out, and social scientists and historians, and I think in its time and in its day, it was really a way of bringing new faculty into the interdisciplinary discussion of the campus. It's very good.
Thanks.
What about that in its time, in its day? So it's one question, and a side question that I was going to ask earlier, to kind of move it in a different direction. What was it about that space? I've been thinking, what is it about this that makes it work? Is it the people? Well, the people have come and gone. It's about the dedication and the regularity. But what in its time, say more about that, in its time, in its day.
I almost have to turn everything, because I was sitting here thinking, so in 2002, I left the building in order to direct the Lilly
That's right.
program.
Yeah.
And they put we wanted that office in the Raney building so badly to keep that connection between the Lilly program and the 2 departments. And it didn't work out that way. They put me across at Mills. And so for me, and then I was here lots of evenings. It was a much more student life kind of program, and so, quite frankly, I wasn't able to make many of the Friday afternoons. So sometimes when I say in its day, I mean simply things caused me to have to pull out. I don't know if there are other things about it as well. So I have regretted these years I'm now back in the classroom. I've regretted what I lost by not being able to be part of that. Had other benefits.
What do you think?
I think there's definitely something about the space, right? Not just any space. This is a space, but we're all remembering a space and a practice, right? And now the philosophy people are over at Mills, and we all feel that now. I think, right? And we're going to a new space, and is that, you mentioned, you sort of alluded to this in the beginning. What was it about that space? How do you build these communities of discussion? Is it the regularity? Is it the openness of the people? Is it what is it that makes this work and so important over time?
So I think you've named a couple of items. But going back to something, Emily, you mentioned in your opening. A few years ago, one of our current religious studies majors, Miranda Donachie, did a little talk on space.
Yes.
And she went and interviewed different departments on campus about the interaction that the faculty members in that department have with their students. And she came back and said, wow, there are certain departments in certain buildings that have similar kinds of interactions. Mills is not one of them.
That's right.
But she talked about Reynolds, and there's a kind of a lobby refrigerator place where students and the faculty can meet. And she was talking about is the informal conversation. So if you think of the Raney, when you're on your way to, I'm on my way to the printer or something, and a student is there, and they say, oh, how are you doing today? And, you know, blah, blah. What are you working, what are you reading, you know? And that just, you know, oh, you're reading this. Have you thought about whatever it might be? And then, you know, and just, and your own learning, I'm learning from the students as well. That space, and I think it was Tom Goodwin who pointed out to me that he said architects don't design academic buildings anymore with this much space, the hallways, because this was the infirmary, and he said they never do this. And he said, but part of it is the actual lobby and space that accommodates these kinds of needs. So I think it's several things, it's not just one, but actually the physical space itself
is important, and it, you know, and I mean, I've even thought about this, you know, the con shell classroom, right, has the chairs drilled down, right, in a particular configuration, which is teacher here and students here. And that was not the case, but I mean, there was, you moved it around. It was, you know, think about going outside and all sitting on the ground, right, or sitting in that gazebo. Yeah, space makes people behave in certain ways and feel certain ways. And so, yeah, how do we maintain it and nurture that over time?
It sounds to me like Ellis can really be good.
Are there
In
gonna
this
be,
respect.
are there gonna be classrooms in Ellis?
Yes.
Okay,
That was-
because I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that we all socialize so much,
Yes.
is that
Yeah.
the classroom spaces were always taken, and so you were always waiting for the class to let out.
Yes.
And you had a place to sit while you waited,
That's absolutely
and then you
right.
just talked to whoever was there.
And drink the coffee and put your quarter in the cup, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of us were a little bit more free riding on the coffee.
It was
A
suggested.
quarter, that seems a little high. Like whatever pocket change I had, maybe.
We were hoping people's addictive tendencies would draw them to our machine over here, but we actually fought really hard to try to wrestle the conference room away from the marketing and communications people so that we could have classes in this building for these 2 years in order to create that flow,
Yeah.
because we recognize that, oh, in the absence of that, we might not see people and have what we had before.
Yeah.
But we are gonna have that again in the new space.
Because I remember one of the weird things, there's this one, I only remember it happening once, but this like kind of interloper class. It was like not a philosophy or a religion class. It was the first time Mark Chance taught history of death in America. And it was in the Raney building, and I don't know why, but I just remember like students coming out of that room and people being like, what did you do today in this death class? And so we must have been talking to one another a lot just about like what class you were in and what class you were in and what you were doing today. So yeah, the fact that like it was like a holding pen almost made it work.
I wonder if today would suffer a little bit from technology. I've been talking to a few people about how much I feel like the classroom has changed, because I used to walk into a classroom and students were already talking to one another. And now you walk in and each one is on their own phone, and you almost have to come in and create the community before you can even begin teaching. And I think I'm just now adjusting to that, realizing, oh my goodness. So I thought my teaching did help create community, but I think there was already community developing, and I've been riding off that. Yeah. Y'all have that? I mean, so now in the Raney, so maybe people would just be sitting there in Ellis, staring at their devices.
I wonder if you could have a no phone space.
No.
I've tried to say, like, once you walk into my classroom, you're not allowed.
No.
Doesn't work.
I can do it once I'm there.
Yeah.
But it's that before time when I'm not there,
Yeah.
that they're no longer.
Right. Yeah. I
I think it
taught a
depends.
class, I was telling Jay, I took the Spanish immersion program in January, and it overlapped with my semester by 2 weeks, so I actually had my classes were all online for 2 weeks, and then I came back together. And I came back to, like, so it was week 3 of our first time in person. I started talking in there the whole time, like, still on their computers, and finally I said, hello, like, we're in person now, we're not online anymore. And they're, oh, okay, and then they shut them all down. But yeah, they were not even prepared once it started. But they're not in the Raney building, so maybe if they were, it'd be different.
You know, I think there's one item that we have, or not, it's not an item, but aspect we haven't mentioned, and that is the wonderful role that's been played by people like Tammy and originally Kathy
Kathy
Goodwin.
Goodwin,
Yeah.
You know, in the there's never been a sense in the Mills building that the administrative assistant for that building is to play quite the role of being with students and faculty, that there has been an expectation. Again, I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong. It's
Yeah.
not the expectation of the building. That the administrative assistant would be this, I don't know, go to help
The
aid.
glue. yeah.
The glue.
You know, I mean, Kathy Goodwin listened to so many stories about my babies growing up. She didn't need to do that, you know, but she did. And we would gather in her office, and that probably happens here. See, I don't get that, and we don't gather in an office and talk.
Well, Tammy does not like attention focused on her, and so I'm not going to look at her, but I'm going to talk about her. This is a temporary space, and we're going to move. This is actually, there will be one more Friday afternoon discussion. I don't know the topic. I won't be here next week, next Friday. So this is my last one here, for sure. But I think Tammy has created an environment here. The couches, the paintings, the odors, the flowers. She is a born hostess in the best of senses. And I just think I'm really grateful to her. You know, her office isn't quite as central, but you know, people feel very free to go in and go out and do it all the time. And so I just think it's been great, Tammy. Thank you so much. Wouldn't it have been nice if she were here when we said that? So I want to just thank everybody for coming, and thank you all for
Can I
coming.
say one quick thing? I'm going to do my development duty here, and I was coming up with trivia questions for Hendrix Trivia last week, and came across this, and then the Marshall T. Steele Center was founded maybe in 40 years ago today.
Yeah.
But they started talking about it. It came from the bequest of Miss Ruth E. Veazey, okay? Miss Ruth E. Veazey was not an alumna of the college, but a dear friend of Marshall T. Steele's. And Miss Veazey's money obviously built Veazey Hall, and it created the initial endowment for the Marshall T. Steele Center. And Ruth E. Veazey's great niece is on campus today.
Good.
And she told me, you know, Marshall T. Steele told me some stories about Steele that were quite funny. But I just thought that was very interesting, and that the Steele Center today is, as far as I know, apart from the Murphy Foundation, the largest internal endowment of the college. It has, you know, provided for 40 years of,
Yeah.
and you know, and that,
Will she be here tomorrow? Will the niece be here?
I think so.
Good.
I think so. So, yeah. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there a furniture budget? I was thinking, these are really
This is part of the smell. You
I
gotta
was just
maintain
thinking
the
about the
smell.
cushions. I mean, the frames are great. The frames are
Slip
good.
covers are being negotiated.
Okay. It really is just the covers.
I'd like to go on the record saying I find that horrifying. That
Really? I mean, come on. They just say I graduated 18 years ago, and
Is it the same?
These
I
are
was
fairly
so
new.
happy
This is
to
the
see
second
them.
set.
Oh,
since in
yeah.
my time
Actually,
here.
wait. I think I have a great idea, and you can have your name put on it too.
Hey, you need a job? Now we're talking.
Emily, you missed the
Let's just
days
talk.
of the orange carpet.
Yeah.
Oh, the
Oh, no,
orange
weren't these
carpet.
orange, or were they? These were blue, and the carpet was orange.
Orange. Oh, yeah. It was. It was sort of, and it was shaggy kind of orange carpet. Oh, it was really.
But I was very pleased to see that.
So are you still happy to see that?
thrilled.
Because you should have seen the orange. You should have seen the orange. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks so much.